Hi, everybody. November is National Native American Heritage Month. And in honor of that, we wanted to feature Native American parents and or folks that work in prevention along with Native American families to share a pro-heritage perspective. We wanted to talk about culture and how that can be one of our strongest resources, both inside our tribal communities and beyond. At the end of the day, parenting is parenting. We all want the best for our kids, no matter our ethnic backgrounds. And so, what can we learn from each other is something that we wanted to explore. We also wanted to explore just identity development. Where do I fit and how do I belong as part of teenage growth? And can heritage support that in any kind of way? Towards all of this, we are joined by four very special guests: Brenda Whitehorse, Tony Pelt, Trevor Olson, and Alyn Mitchell. They all come to us from the San Juan School District in Southeast Utah, which serves students from the Ute, Mountain Ute, and Navajo Nation tribes. Welcome, everybody. We're glad to have you. I'd like to start and have each of you just tell us a little bit about what you do. Also on the podcast, if you are a parent, let us know that and just the ages of your kids. Our listeners tell us they like hearing that. So, Trevor, why don't you start us?
My name is Trevor Olson. I am the Student Services and Federal Programs Director for the San Juan School District. We work to implement programming specific to our Ute Mountain Ute students and our Navajo students here in the San Juan School District, located in the Four Corner region of the state of Utah. I am also a proud husband and father to a beautiful wife and two daughters, 13 and 16 years old.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ms. Brenda, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yat she Brenda Whitehorse and she. Hatsoed and the entrance in the Geneva Shishin, Kachitni the Shichedo Ki Ani the Chanel. So my name is Brenda Whitehorse. I am from the Green Meadow clan, born for the Blackstreak Wood clan. My maternal clan is the Red Running Into Water clan, and my paternal clan is the Towering House clan. And I am also a proud mother of a 22-year-old son and happily married. And I originally from Rehoboth, New Mexico, but have made Utah my home. So I've been living in Utah for over 25 years. And so that's me. And I work with the Heritage Language Department. I'm the Heritage Language Director and work with Indian education. So some of the federal programs that relate directly to Native American students in our school district.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to talk more about that. Ms. Tony, how about you?
I Mike Duichkus, Nunania, Tony Pelt, Shea Tony Pelt, Yeneshe, Nota Dene Neshle, Torechini Bashichin, Nota A Dashache, Quiziklane Dashanele. Good morning, my name is Tony Pelt. I was born for the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. My paternal clan is Bitterwater, and my paternal grandfather is Many Goats. I am the outreach liaison for the Native Youth Community Project and also a school social worker for the San Juan School District. I have adult children. I have 5, happily married, 29, 28, 26, 24, and an 18-year-old.
Awesome. You win. That's great. Miss Alyn, tell us about you.
Hey, hi. So my name is Alyn Mitchell, and I am the Prevention Director. Work out of our local Substance Abuse Authority, San Juan Counseling, here in San Juan County, and I'm also the chair of the Utah Prevention Network. And we work with our Prevention County Coalition here in San Juan. I also am a mom. I have 5 children, 33, 29, 2 25-year-olds, and a 20-year-old, and I have 4 beautiful grandchildren, ages 7, 5, 3, and 9 months old. So that's me.
Okay, I might have spoken too soon. You both win. the 5 children. That's so cool. And grandkids, right? Thank you all for being here. I have been looking forward to this episode for a long time. As an outsider, our tribal communities look so rich and look like they have so much depth, and it's quite something to see. So I really appreciate you being here, and let's just dive in. The language alone seems really powerful in terms of connecting people, but tell us a little bit about the heritage or cultural based programs that you're working in. And is there anything about the belief system underneath them that is important to know or understand?
Well, I can go ahead and start with that.
Please.
I work with 8 Navajo language teachers, and the language is the foundation of our culture and also our traditional pathways to making sure that our children understand not only the history of our people, but the struggles and also the beauty of our culture. And so the language is tied directly to the culture of our people. So you can't have culture without the language. So language preservation has been such important work, not only for our tribe, but also for San Juan School District. Like over the years, we've had a Heritage Language Resource Center. And in our resource center, we have created materials specifically in Navajo that not only our teachers, but our community can access a lot of those materials. And as a matter of fact, we have quite a few community members that come from all over Navajo Nation that go to our Heritage Language Resource Center to purchase materials that they can utilize in their homes. We have Navajo bingo games. We also have Navajo vocabulary cards. And one of the things that we would like to see is to see that expand into our Ute language and culture. So we're working on that. And yes, the language is directly tied to our 4 directional way of thinking within our tribe. And so we have 4 sacred mountains that the Navajo Nation is located between those 4 sacred mountains that serves as a protection for our people, but also serves as many traditional stories and songs and ceremonies that are tied to those sacred mountains and the 4 sacred directions that we live in. And so what is really important is that our children learn how to speak their language. And right now, people that are my age are still fluent speakers, but our youth that are moving up into elementary and middle school and high school, they're struggling and speaking the language. And there's so many different reasons why that's happening. One is this boarding school era that totally created a disconnect for many families in terms of not being able to speak the language in the school and physically and emotionally being scarred from speaking the language and also practicing our culture and our traditions. So that has left a negative impact in terms of our language being spoken across the nation of Native American tribes. So that's a huge thing. But as a mother, some of that responsibility also ties into our home and how we would like to see our grandchildren and children keep the language going. Because, like I said, with the language, then it continues to our songs and our traditions and our ceremonies, and to keep those things going for futures that are coming and generations that are coming, we have to keep that strong. But I know Tony can also speak from the youth perspective.
That was great, Brenda. Thank you so much. Tony, please tell us more.
So, as I introduce myself, I am half Navajo and I am half Ute. So, I've lived in White Mesa most of my life, the Mountain Ute tribe. So, the heritage there, it kind of relates to the Navajo tradition in some ways. They kind of lived by each other with the Navajos, so they kind of integrated and kind of followed the same ceremonies. But some of the heritage and the cultural programs that I come from and what we use here in the school district is coming off of the Native Youth Community Project. And that is a program that's trying to bring out the cultural heritage from White Mesa. And with that, the number one thing that we were working on is the youth language, the preservation of that, bringing out a language app that we've been working with, gathering the elders, the youth speakers in the community, and also the youth to come together and try to figure out what they want to learn. It could be words or it could be phrases. But with that, it ties into the culture with the youth sun dance, with the youth bear dance, the rite of passage for the boys and the girls, sort of a way as the youth trying to identify themselves. So we're trying to bring that back and help the youth today to find that balance, to find that path. That's kind of what I've been working towards.
So I'm struck by the ways of being in the world that are embedded in everything you're talking about. I would love to know more about the 4 sacred directions, if you don't mind sharing, but also just the sun dance and the bear dance and the rite of passage. These are all things that tell us, who we are and then how to be in the world. And I think those are so powerful for kids, no matter the culture. If there's anything else that you would say about any of that, I would love to hear it. And then I want to ask you some questions kind of about intergenerational. Seems like grandparents are probably pretty important in this. Tony, anything else you would tell us about those traditions?
So the Sundance goes back a long way. Sundance is held on our sacred mountain, the Ute Mountain, located south of Cortez and near Toyoc is the headquarters of the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. So Sundance is held every year, about 4 days, and I can't say too much about it other than that. So with the bear dance is a celebration. Use the bear as a protector among our tribe, one who's powerful and has that strength and the resilience. But also the bear dance is kind of like a courtship during the time. So, and it brings on, it's kind of like the bear wakes up when the first sound of the thunder in the springtime. And that symbolizes the first bear dance, which is held up in the northern tribes with the northern youths. They start off the bear dance. It goes on for 4 days as well. And the last day is the feast day to celebrate. With the courtship, it's also we dance for those that can't dance. We dance for our family. We dance for people that are sick or going through hardship. When we enter that corral, the corral opening is on to the east where the sun comes up. So when we go in there, we let all our frustration and everything that's troubling us when we dance. So when we go out, we're rejuvenated. Back in the day, they used to hang up. Nowadays, they have these rocks where you put all your negative thoughts and your burdens into the rock, or like a trinket, it could be like a ribbon or a shawl string. And on the way out, they would tie it to the opening of the bear dance and leave it there. You left it behind. We're going to start over another year. So that signifies the bear dance, and the bear dance goes from spring to fall. Starts in the northern tribes, and then it goes east to southern Intergenerational, Colorado, and it comes to Toy, and they have theirs in June, and then it comes back to White Mesa in the fall, usually Labor Day weekend. Our bear dance, we put the bear back into hibernation. Well, yeah, it just signifies the seasons and it's like a rejuvenation. Then the rite of passage is when boys are coming of age. There's things that they can and can't do, and then same for the girls. Usually it comes from your family, like grandparents. They just hand down that generation and they tell them you can't do this and that. You gotta fast. You gotta wake up before the sun, and you won't be lazy. That you'll listen and you'll do your chores, what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to take care of your family. more to the girls. I feel like the females have more work than boys do, taking care of the family, learn how to cook, just being in hunting. And same with the boy, you're raised to be a good father, provide for your family, just the balancing, walking that line there and taking on whatever comes your way.
I'm a little speechless. That was an excellent explanation, and the amount of connection and reverence and balance. I loved that use of that term, and how to be an adult, how to serve and live your best life and be a part of this community. It's really powerful. I really appreciate your sharing that. I think our listeners will hear the depth and the value in ceremonies like that and what it would bring to children and to the community. Thank you so much. Miss Brenda?
I think how, a lot of the things, the reverence that Tony talked about, and when I think about the four sacred directions, those are directions that start from the east when the sun comes out, and it goes all the way around in the four cardinal directions. And with that, there's that air that comes out that brings life. We call it it's air. But with that air, we have the ability to live on Mother Earth. And then we also have our Father Sky. So all of that makes us a spiritual being on this earth. And with the four sacred cardinal directions, it relates to everything that is part of our culture. So we have four sacred mountains, we have four sacred colors, we have our four main clans, first clans from our stories that have been carried on for generations. And then we have our own, I would call it like characters within our story through storytelling that is not just stories that have been carried on, but they're actually represented in our songs, in our prayers, in our sand paintings. And some of those characters is like our twin warriors that fought off the monsters, and White Shell Woman that created our first clans, and then all of our animal beings on earth. So there's so many different stories that are tied to all of that. And so when you ask, what does it mean, the four cardinal directions, it means so many different things, and it can't be explained in one response. I often think about like our medicine men that have learned these songs and these prayers, and they actually study these songs and prayers for years beyond a doctoral degree. And with all the knowledge that they have, they always say there's still so much more to learn, that there's so much information out there that we don't know. And what that means for me as a Navajo woman and a Diné is that I'm a sacred person on this Mother Earth. And so I need to teach my child that he's a sacred being as well. And for all of our children to never forget their grassroots and never forget where they came from and the strength of their people. And although there are such things as generational trauma that exists due to boarding school through the assimilation that has occurred in history, and like the long walk and things like that, all of that has created generational trauma with not only our tribe, but many of the tribes across the nation. But what can reverse all that trauma within our children is for them to really learn the beauty of their culture and their language, and to understand where they come from is a sacred place. And if they can just only learn the Mother Earth song, and if they can only learn certain stories that are carried on, that is enough to really reverse that generational trauma that has been passed on. And then I think that will be something that will be the hook for our youth to actually say, hey, I want to learn more about my culture. I want to learn more about my language and more about my ancestors and how they knew about constellations, they knew about ecology, and they knew about a lot of the sciences that we have, that they practiced these ways for many years and they're carried down. And so, although they may not have been credited for a lot of these things, like planting and harvesting and all of that, there's so many different teachings that come from each tribe. And a lot of those teachings also come through the stages of life. So I'll just share one story. There's so many stories to share, and I don't want to take too much time. But like when a child is born, it's very sacred. And they say that the child comes in on a white horse. And when the child comes to be with us, when they get that first breath of air, that that's that they're still considered a child of God, and I would say a holy child. Like we call it, that they're sacred in Kachandatiyan. So when they're born and that life and the air comes into them, they do their first cry. And that's when they're known to the world that this child is here to be a part of us. And that's when the parents, the grandparents, and the family embrace the child and they say, welcome, my child. You are from this clan. This is your maternal clan. This is your paternal clan. These are your maternal grandfathers. These are your paternal grandfathers. This is who you are as a sacred child on this earth. And so sometimes I think we forget that in our society and how wonderful and powerful that is to have a sacred child be brought into the world and be acknowledged by all the relatives in such a special way. And I think out of all of the stories, that's the most beautiful story because then that brings kinship. And in the Navajo culture, a child is never left alone. Like for me, I have a lot of children because I'm an auntie. So a lot of my nieces and nephews will say mom to me. And sometimes people get confused. Why are they calling you mom? Because you only have one son. Well, it's the beauty of our culture and our kinship. So if my first clan is shared by their first clan, and then they can greet me as Shema, my mother, or Shema Yeja. So, and the same thing with the father clans. So, really, we have programs like the homeless program, and a lot of the families don't put that they're homeless on the application because they don't see themselves as being homeless, because they see themselves as having so many relatives. And through our clan system and kinship system. So, I think that's the beauty, and that's also connected to the four sacred teachings, but it's also connected to white shell woman and the beauty of bringing a child into the world. So that's what I would like to share.
This, it's all so big. It's a little hard to even think. My mind is so broadly expanded right now. It's hard to even think what the next question or point should be. I was going to ask you more about the grandparents and the intergenerational aspect of the culture. I feel like you really just explained that. Grandparents, sometimes in all of our American cultures, are a little lost or unsure about the role that they play inside the family. I've always looked at that kind of sadly and felt like, wow, our grandparents really hold so much of who the family is and where the family came from. I feel like they bridge time a little bit from the past that is truly gone or has left the earth to the current modern life. I don't know. Is there anything else that you would tell us about the intergenerational importance and any encouragement to grandparents in general or in tribal communities to stay involved and to
Yeah, I can share my own personal story. So my grandmother never spoke English. She spoke only Navajo. And then my dad was the same thing. He was a rancher. And at one time he had 20 horses. And so he self-taught himself English and then actually how to read on his own through a lot of his own efforts. And so my dad was fluent in English and Navajo, and he was a foreman for the Bureau of Indian Affairs maintenance. So he was a mechanic. And so my dad pretty much was the breadwinner in our family. And so my mom was the individual that taught us a lot of the traditional and cultural ways. And during our winter vacations and summer vacations, we would be dropped off at our grandmother's house. And my grandmother had sheep, she had livestock, she had a cornfield. There was always something that needed to be done at her house, and she was a weaver. So she was very busy and she did not speak English. And so that's where we learned a lot of our Navajo language, my siblings and I. And so, as a matter of fact, when my grandmother would get paid, when she got her monthly check from her late husband's pension, we would go take her to town and she would tell us in Navajo, these are some places that I want to go. Or if she wove a new rug, we would go with her to the trading post and we would barter for her to get the best price for her rug. And so I feel like we've never seen ourselves as being poor. But to other people that might consider that differently than their lifestyle, they might have thought that we might have been, but we've never, ever looked at ourselves as being poor. We were rich. I mean, we had the best childhood. We rode horses. We took care of the sheep. We had a lot of fun. and and so
wonderful.
I had a great childhood. And I feel like nowadays with the technology and with the busyness of where the world is at today, not only for Indigenous children, but for all children, the joys of being out and learning about nature and learning about how to form and be around animals, that's lost.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of our kids now are entrapped in technology and their video games. And I think a lot of that is has become a huge barrier in teaching our language and our traditions to our children and kind of breaking them away from a lot of that so that we can teach them the ways of our people. And so for that reason, we're having to go to technology to teach our language to our children so that because they can access some of these apps on their phone. But I think the best way to learn is just to immerse yourself in the culture and the language. And I'm just thinking that we all need grandmothers that was my grandmother, like she never spoke English, but in the morning she would turn on she lived in a hogan too, and we all slept on sheepskins. So when we visit her, and it was so much fun. Early in the morning, she would be up like around 4 o'clock in the morning, and she would turn on KTNN. And KTNN is the Navajo radio station, the Navajo Nation. And yeah, you would hear all of the old fashioned country music like Roy Rogers and then you would hear a lot of the Navajo spoken. And I remember hearing Selena mini children speak very eloquent Navajo on the radio station, and she would talk about all the events that are happening, politics, education, health issues, anything and everything that was happening on the reservation. She would talk about it in Navajo. And sometimes I really miss that. I mean, we still have KTNN and we do still have Navajo speakers, but I'm afraid for our future because our, like I said, from preschool to I would say early college, freshman year in college, our students are not speaking the language like we did when I was young. When you're comparing generations. And so there's an urgency now to save that, to preserve our language. And it's kind of almost ironic, and it's almost like a slap in the face to where it's like, okay, your language is ripped out of your people,
Yeah.
through assimilation and all of that. But now sometimes we have that funding, but now it's like we're having to go in reverse, and we have to build that interest in our youth so that they can get empowered to relearn. And so it's a real struggle, not only for our tribe, but for many of our tribes across the nation.
There's so many messages in there. Everything from, okay, grandma and grandpa, be yourselves and bring everything you've got to your families, to the technology conversation, right? And
Mhm.
it's a tough one. The fact that you can build language apps is really fantastic. And that might really help in the preservation and the exposure, because we know that adolescent brain development, you need to get those languages 12 to 17, while the brain still can comprehend languages. But then the distraction of modern life, it's just every parent on the planet is dealing with that. And what a parent can completely freak themselves out about that. Everything that's going to be lost if we let our kids stay on social media. From a parent perspective, finding a place where you can be okay with modern life and with keeping traditions and keeping what you grew up with. Boy, I think it's a big challenge. I think it's an important challenge. Tony, is there anything else you would say along these lines, either intergenerational or language?
So when I grew up, I had the best of both. I had rich Navajo culture with my father and my grandparents on that side. So on weekends, I would go down to Monument Valley and spend a weekend with them. My grandma, she just spoke Navajo, and it was kind of hard to communicate with her or understand what she was saying because I grew up in White Mesa with the Ute culture there. But as time went by, picked up on words and phrases. When my grandma was getting mad at my father, you pick up on that. And then the daily chores, she had a lot of sheep, and it was fun just to go out to the corral and with my brother, and we used to go play with the sheep. We used to get on them and ride around. But yeah, and then coming back home to White Mesa and seeing the grandmother there, and she spoke Ute, nothing but Ute, and it was kind of hard to communicate with her as well. But she just was so enriched with her culture. She wore nothing but Ute dresses with the belt, and she would always make baskets. That took up her time to make money. She would use the dyes, see them on the floor, different colors, and just going in and out of the house. And she would have a radio playing. Just remembering all that, the smell of the willows. It was a happy time in back then, and just thinking about the culture there, and it was there. And now in our community, the grandparents, are passing away. They did teach it to their kids. But then at that line there, when the kids went to placement, they were sent off, and they kind of lost that when they came back. Grandparents had passed, seen that change. And with my mom, she grew up in Allen Canyon with her grandparents and her mom and dad, and she had a really great time out there until things had happened. And then she was sent to boarding school. When she came back, she lost a lot of her grandparents. They had already passed, and at that time, then they were moved to White Mesa, where they are now. I see it in the community where if they don't have their grandparents and the youth speaker, now it's all English. With the language app and it being able to help, yes, it would help, but we also need the parents, their input, their help as well, and to help this language app succeed. And that comes down to the phones and balancing both worlds, technology, and it is a distraction in modern life right now. And it's just finding that balance and that empowerment and that purpose for parents to help us help you, help us help with the language. It's going to be a community effort. to tie that together.
Again, this is just a really expansive conversation that I think has so much value in so many directions. We could almost stop right now, but let me ask kind of more specific alcohol and drug prevention kind of questions. And Trevor and Alen, if you wanted to chime in here too, I feel like your community is known for doing some pretty powerful prevention things that are deeply tied to the local context. And if we have people in prevention listening to us, that language is going to make sense to them. How do you take prevention best practices and work in a local community in a context that can be really powerful for that community? Does that spark any response or thoughts from anybody, really? But Trevor, do you want to start us?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've learned as part of that culture and sense of home that we find as we help our students find that self-identity, there are reoccurring themes in health and wellness and those four directions that apply to our prevention model that helps students to make good choices, think about what their next steps are, plan, have those pro-social things in their lives. In Navajo culture, a lot of our students learn about the beauty way and finding the beautiful way. In prevention, that is pro-social choices, that is making good choices, staying away from those things that are harmful in order for them to have the beautiful things of life. And so our program and our prevention messaging has really evolved around that sense of home and that sense of culture for our students to identify with their culture, but also learn those strategies that will help them to make good choices and learn their identity and where they belong, and that they can make those good decisions and stay away from some of those things that can cause harm to their life. And so our campaign in our local area has really focused on those cultural beliefs that our students have. Aline?
Yeah. And to echo kind of what Trevor said, I just believe that we all have to know who we are at the core, right? And what does that look like and what does that mean? And for me, it's about, well, I think it's for everyone and across all cultures. It's about family, it's about community, it's being home. And if a child has a family that struggles or is not very close, then do they have that school community? Do they have that extended family community or just the community that they live in? It's all so important in prevention to be able to help them feel like they belong and that they are of value. And that is really what is important at the core. And I feel like we talked a little bit about social media and some of those things. I think those things are so wonderful in so many ways, but they do draw away from that sense of community and connection and family. And we need that as humans, no matter where we live or who we're with. We need that human connection, which the basic core of that is the family. And so we really try in prevention to strengthen families, to strengthen communities, to strengthen school settings so that the kids feel that they are valued and that that is what is really important. And that gives them the courage and the strength and the power to be able to go on and to be able to make those good pro-social choices that Trevor was talking about. So
Great. Brenda or Tony, would you add anything to it?
Well, I think with the prevention that you talked about, the families that are really strong with their cultural roots and their language, I feel like have that ability to have their children make those good connections that are healthy and productive. We do have some families that do not have that cultural connection. So, like what Tony had mentioned, some of the parents that have gone to boarding school, they had such a negative experience that they've never learned about their cultural heritage or their language. And they were traumatized. They were beaten for speaking their language. They have gone through so many different abuse in the name of education. And so some of those parents that are Native American thought they were doing a service for not learning the language and passing that on to their children because they didn't want their children to experience the same hardships that they did. But I think if that was different, if they were able to continue to speak their language and keep their cultural ways and not go through that process that we did in history, we would have healthier communities. And so it's hurtful for not only our tribal nations, but it's also a painful thing for most Americans to talk about. But I think that's something that's important to understand if you're going to be going into any kind of counseling or any kind of social work to really understand why those things exist in their tribal communities. And I really do feel like for children that don't have that heritage and that strong culture connection in their home, if they can be exposed to it at school, like through a heritage language class, or have a teacher that can share a cultural story with them and do cultural activities. Because in our Native Youth Community Project grant, our heritage language teachers actually create spaces for their students to create their own ribbon skirts, or they're creating things for themselves that they can take. We call it make and take projects. And so if they don't have a ribbon skirt or if they don't have a traditional outfit, there's an opportunity for them to create one in their heritage language classroom with their teacher's help. And I think just that, just being able to embrace that part of their heritage and their culture really makes a difference. And then learning their clans and their kinship, and then they can start asking more information from their parents. And I do really feel like when students are exposed to their heritage and their language, and then can see examples of who they are in the school system, and can see that their heritage and their language is appreciated in the schools that they attend, that really helps them to overcome a lot of those barriers. And I guess the last thing that I would say is that we are still here. Like our people, like our Diné people, we are strong people. We are still here. We still have our language. We still have our traditions and our ceremonies. And the challenge for us is to keep that and to keep that going for generations to come. And so I am very proud of my heritage. And I am very proud to speak my language. I'm not ashamed to speak my language at all. I love to speak my language. I can carry on a full conversation in my language. And my son hears the language all the time spoken in our home. And I'll ask him a question in Navajo and our Diné language. And he would sometimes respond in Navajo, sometimes he responds in English, but he still hears it. And his dad is also a fluent speaker. And quite surprisingly, he's been teaching his non-native friends Navajo. So I know there's some transfer that's happening.
It's nice.
So,
I like that.
but yeah,
Wonderful.
that's what I would close with.
That's fantastic. I'm struck by how much youth development is embedded in everything we're talking about, and the practical steps of making the choices that young people want to be making based on who they understand they are, who they want to be in the future. It sounds like there's a lot of young people that are stepping up in your communities in different ways. Just that leadership experience is so powerful. Before we end, Tony, what else would you tell us along any of these lines?
Yes, parenting was hard and is hard still. I got adult children, and I didn't mention I do have 4 grandchildren as well, and those kids left the house, and now I got new kids. But it's such a blessing. But yeah, with prevention and alcohol and drugs, I mean, parenting takes both mom and a dad. But I see in the community, they either lack one or the other. And that's where grandparents come in and they take care of the whole family. And I see that in the community, and coming with the cultural perspective of bringing the language preservation back, along with cultural activities, beadwork, ribbon making, dressmaking. It all ties in and brings them together so they can share an activity and a culture and pass it down. It's a prevention way of alcohol and drugs, but it's also the parenting skills come into play. You gotta communicate with your children. You gotta be open. You have to show them you love them. And most of the kids that I've worked with, they haven't had a parent tell them they love them. Letting the parents know you got to be there for your kids and vice versa. And the main thing is to listen. We think we know if it's coming from the child or the parent or the grandparent. Give them that respect. And it ties into smudging yourself morning, night, doing your prayers. It goes a long way in trusting that it will all tie and come together. With the cultural activities I do provide in White Mesa, there is a lesson behind every single activity that we do. And the parents need to bring that out and share it with their family, because each family has their own, this is how it is, and it can be different ways that they interpret it, but the goal is to come together as a family, take the right steps to become better people.
It was lovely. You're making me think. So our campaign name is Talk They Hear You, which obviously is a directive to parents and a reminder to parents that you do have this influence in your children's lives. And I think as parents, for many reasons, we stop believing that in some way. And part of it's just getting to high school, and developmentally high school kids just push away and are just a mess sometimes to deal with. But even what you were saying, Tony, I feel like we could translate the word talk to do. Do your culture, do your life. Your kids are hearing you. They are seeing the way you work. They are seeing what you value. And even if they're not telling you that, even if they're not feeding back that they see or they hear or they understand, they do, according to all the research that's out there. And it's a really powerful thing to know as a parent, and hopefully a encouraging, motivating thing as a parent to stay engaged and to keep going. So,
Yeah, like I said, parenting is hard, and I get a lot of people that say, "Oh, Tony, you raise your kids right," but it takes a lot. It is a family effort. So, and it's like, oh, you put your iron fist down. No, I didn't. I just communicate, talk to my kids, and just show that love for them, that they know that they're important, that they never forget that.
you guys, this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you so much. I knew it would be great. It's even better than I thought. And I think it's going to be really powerful for our listeners. Any final statements before we go?
Yeah, I would like to just as a final thought, and it's nothing different than what we haven't already talked about, but we talk so much about the trauma, and there's been so much trauma across cultures. And I think it's important to realize too that there is hope in that trauma. And working at the counseling center, the hope is in the connection. Unlike Tony and Brenda said, their spiritual roots and their cultural roots and their familial roots, making that connection is so important to give hope, and building relationships. That is what can deal with trauma and what can actually heal trauma. And it's so important to be able to understand that those things really are critical, because trauma has gone across many cultures. And the way to be able to heal that and deal with that and to have hope is building those relationships and that connection with people, and helping them to be able to make something good out of the bad that has happened. Right. So I just appreciate being in this conversation and working with these wonderful people that we work with down here, and the opportunity to be able to express that on this podcast. So thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I think the only thing that I can add is with Native American History Heritage Month and looking at the history, we had a virtual Indigenous concert and it turned out great. But one of the things that I thought was so awesome about our virtual concert, we had Vince Redhouse, and we actually have it available on our website. But Vince talked about the relationship that he had with students and teaching them the native flute and how they were able to express their emotions and put all their energy into playing the flute. And I think students need to have an avenue of managing their stress, managing their emotions, and going back to the arts, whether it's playing a native flute, whether it's creating, learning a traditional arts and crafts type of skill, or learning something else that's more modern, but making it a connection with the contemporary part of it to Native American art. And so I think students really need that avenue to channel a lot of that stress that they have. And so many of our communities where our students live, they live way into rural areas, and there's not community centers that they can go to. There's not boys and girls clubs that they can go to really access a lot of those resources. And I think we need a lot more resources in those communities to help our youth so that they can find positive ways to deal with stress. So that's the last thing I would like to add.
Very important. Thank you. Anyone else?
Trevor should have the last thought.
No, I just think, Debbie, you definitely learned from the best of the best, and you can see why this team is so passionate about what they do, because they do care about not only culture, but our students, and they're doing amazing things. And so I really appreciate working with them and their passion for serving others and really helping in great ways. So thanks for letting us share a little bit about it.
The power of the team is very apparent. Thank you all so much. We appreciate the time that you spent with us this morning, and we know it's going to be valuable for so many. Take care. We want to remind listeners that Talk They Hear You materials, including this podcast, can be found at the Talk They Hear You website. That is talktheyhearyou.samhsa.gov, all spelled out. Talk They Hear You, no spaces, .samhsa, which is SAMHSA.gov. Please share this site and this podcast with your friends. The more we can be in conversation with each other, the better for everyone, especially our kids. Also, we would like to hear from you. Would you like to be on our show? Do you have any stories to share or tips and techniques that have worked or not worked for you in the past as a parent? Do you have any questions for us or feedback on topics or improvements of any kind? We know your input will help us design the most useful interviews possible. Please contact us at whatparentsaresaying@gmail.com for any of this. Again, all spelled out, whatparentsaresaying@gmail.com. This podcast is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Talk They Hear You is a national prevention campaign that aims to help parents and caregivers talk with their kids about the dangers and risks of underage drinking and other drug use. As a reminder, the views expressed here are not necessarily those of SAMHSA or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.